Welcome to the House of Fi. At the House of Fi, we inspire and encourage families of all shapes and demographics to achieve financial independence. Here, we teach you to become debt-free, build wealth, and increase your income. We also share inspiring stories of others on the road to Fi, others who have made it to Fi, as well as some of our own perspective about this journey. If you're a family on the road to financial independence, we want you to know that financial independence is for everyone. We're glad you're here. Hey everyone! Before we get into the show, I just wanted to remind you of a couple of things. Have you signed up for our private Facebook group yet? If you haven't yet, you should. And if you're liking the show, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a written review over on iTunes or Stitcher or any of the other mediums that you found our show on. Now, finally, we have this awesome 7-step money challenge course that we would love for you to join us. It's 7 steps over the course of 21 days, and it will lay the foundation for the future that you dream of. Now, I hope you enjoy this show. I'm really excited about today's guest, Angela Rozmyn of the blog Tread Lightly, Retire Early. I have been following Angela's blog basically from the beginning, and what I love about it is, number one, it's just different. In her blog, she talks a lot about sustainability and how we can make less of an impact on our environment and how that marries so well with the FIRE movement. But one of the other things that she has really become for our community is just spotlighting the voices of women in the community, which is so needed because this really is such a diverse community of people, and it's so good to hear from all of the voices in it. So we hope that you enjoy the show. Really quickly, I just wanted to give a shout out to all of our listeners all over the world. One of the things that I just discovered this week after looking at some of our stats is that not only is this show reaching thousands of people every single week in the United States, but we are being heard all over. We're being heard in Canada, Australia, England, Russia, China, Brazil, every continent. We are on every continent, which is just amazing to me, and it really just drives home the point that this movement is for everyone. Reaching financial independence and living a life in financial freedom is for everyone, and that's what this show is about, and that's what we're here for, is to help you moms and dads out there with lots of kids, with one kid, single parent families, diverse families. We are here to help all moms and dads find their way to financial independence, and not just in the States, but all over the world. So we hope that you enjoyed today's show. It's a different show, and we're talking about some really good stuff. Well, Angela, welcome to the show. I'm so glad we were able to finally connect.
Thank you for having me. I know it's sometimes more difficult to get a hold of me than some other people, so I'm glad you worked with my schedule.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Angela, you have the blog, Tread Lightly, Retire Early. So for people who maybe aren't familiar with your blog or who you are and kind of what your story is, why don't you let us know just a little bit about who you are?
Okay, so I'm Angela. I live in the Seattle area with my husband and my 4-year-old son. I work 80% time at a job where I work to create affordable, sustainable housing in a really high cost of living area. And then otherwise, I spend a lot of time in nature and hanging out with my neighbors and trying to grab that elusive work-life balance that comes with having kids.
And so did you grow up in the Pacific Northwest, or was that, later in life?
So my husband and I met in this area, and then I went to college down in Oregon, and then we spent a little bit of time in South Carolina when he was in the Marines. And then when his time in the service was up, we moved back to Washington because that's where our families are, which was purposeful before starting a family, because it's a lot of work, and having that village is really, really important. And now, between our two families, our son hangs out with them 3 days a week. So it's a really big daycare cost saver. And also, he gets a really special relationship being with them. So that's really why we're back in the Northwest, and it's beautiful and lovely. And we lucked out and bought our house in the bottom of the market. So we're
Wow.
here to stay.
So, have you always been frugal and interested in sustainability, or was that something that just kind of grew as you got older?
So sustainability definitely has been something since like elementary school. Frugality is it's definitely been a part of my story, but with most things, I've generally started with the environmental side, and the frugal bit tends to come along with it. But then again, there are things like grocery bills where looking toward sustainability and local and that sort of thing has actually gotten us in trouble on the money side, because we kind of gave ourselves a blank check as far as food costs went, as long as they were, sustainably locally minded. And that doesn't always mean frugal.
So, how have you balanced that? How have you kind of, you know, taken into consideration both of the two things that are important to you?
Um, well, it's been a process. The sustainability bit is pretty much how I live on all fronts. So it's the natural thing for me at this point. And this is the frugality thing is a little bit more of a something I have to continue to go back to. I've never had a car payment. We live in a cheaper, smaller home. We tend not to buy the big flashy stuff, but then we can really get in trouble spending money on experiences and food. And so I've really just had to track closely to keep that in check.
So, you said that you've never had a car payment. Where did that come from? Is that something that you learned from your parents? Were your parents frugal growing up?
Yeah, my parents have always been very money minded, and they made sure that us kids had a sense of that as well. Um, I did have a car that I was able to drive in high school, but it was very clearly not mine, and I didn't get to take it with me when I went to college. So I bought my first car at 19. My dad went with me to the dealership, and we found a cheap old car that lasted me almost 8 years. So um, it was very, I don't know if they said it out right, but it was very clear that financing a car really wasn't an option. Kind of like growing up, college was always the thing. Paying full price or paying for a car in full kind of was just expected. I don't know how much we actually talked about it directly, but it was just kind of a given that I would save up money and then I would pay cash for a cheap, reliable car. And so that's what I did.
At 19, how did you do that? Did you work? Did you?
I did. So by then I was working part time in college, and then my parents both own their own businesses. So growing up, if we wanted things outside of basic stuff, it meant doing work for them.
And was your husband, was he sort of the same mindset when you guys met, or was that an evolution?
Yeah, no, his parents paid off their home in the 80s. So he very much grew up in a very frugal mindset home. He did have a car payment on a car for a short time that he bought prior to deploying to Iraq, and then he took all of that non-taxed money and paid off the car. So a little bit different, but he definitely grew up with a very frugal set of parents.
So when you purchased your home, was it just a normal home, or or have you done things to it to make it more energy efficient?
Yeah, so it's a home that was built in the 1960s, so it's definitely not energy efficient to begin with. But we have replaced all of the plumbing fixtures and put in, all LED light bulbs, and we have a 98% efficient furnace and put in natural gas for the hot water tank. So we've done some, definitely not as much as we could, but we've tried not to do too much remodeling at this point, and kept our costs low and just gone with pieces as we've managed to do that.
So I wanted to ask you because when I first saw your blog name, when I saw Tread Lightly, Retire Early, at first, like I didn't really understand kind of the significance of that name. How did you come up with that name, and is there a meaning behind that, or do you expect that people will know what that means?
I don't really have a great story other than I'd been considering starting a blog for maybe 6 months before I did. And then one day on a whim, I read Joe over at Retire by 40's blog,
Mhm.
his start a blog post.
Oh.
I've now seen about 1 million of them, but for whatever reason, that one nudged me over the edge, and I was like, "All right, let's do this." And I kind of had just been debating names, and I wanted something that made it clear that I was focused on the environment as well as being financially independent. But Tread Lightly Financial Independence doesn't sound so great.
Right.
So I went with Tread Lightly Retire Early, which is kind of odd because I'm much more focused on the financial independence side of things and not so sold on the early retirement bit. So I've definitely had some interesting conversations or interviews where people are like, well, so you're retiring early. And I'm like, well,
No.
maybe we'll see. But it's really for me about the freedom that comes with financial independence and the security long term. But again, Tread Lightly, Retire Early sounds way better than Tread Lightly,
Financial
freedom
independence.
from money worries. So,
Right. So someone like my family, so where maybe sustainability has not been a theme in our lives for, it's relatively new. I mean, we know about recycling and all of that, but it's such a small part of the overall idea of sustainability. But for families like mine who are maybe intrigued by that idea or who want to do more, but it just seems like an overwhelming proposition sometimes. Do you have any like thoughts or ideas of meaningful ways that we can make, small changes here and there that we might, see some good impact?
so I've written a couple of posts on my blog about simple things that you can do to become more sustainable in your home and in your workplace. And I recently wrote one on traveling with Airbnb, but really it would be any kind of travel. And what I'd say with both sustainability and really frugality is tackling one thing at a time, just deciding to focus on one bit instead of, trying to go down the line and do all the things right. So maybe 1 month you decide, okay, we're going to really cut down our paper towel use, and you get a whole bunch of unpaper towels or rags or something, and say, okay, instead of grabbing for the paper towels, we're going to use reusable towels instead, and just focus that that's the one change you make over the month. And then maybe once that becomes habit, then you say, okay, now I need to start bringing cloth bags to the grocery store, and just slowly working one habit in on top of the next one. And, once you start doing it for a while, a lot of things like the cloth bags, like the cloth paper towels, you find that they're actually a superior product than the disposable ones that we've all been taught that they're easier and better. But as you start going down that path, at least what I've found is that they tend to work a lot better. So you might have to toss them in the wash every once in a while, but they're just a superior product. So then it gets easier with time.
And those are some of the things that you've implemented into your house.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Like I said, the idea is overwhelming, but I think that the idea of just tackling one thing at a time is, taking it in just little bite-sized chunks is a good way to do that.
Yeah, I do the same sort of thing with our finances and whatnot. I didn't try and overhaul our grocery budget all over at once because it was huge and overwhelming. And so I just started by tackling my work lunches. And I gave myself a budget and tracked it for a month. And over, I think, a 3 or 4 month period, I was able to get it almost to zero. And it was just, that was the only thing I focused on. I didn't worry about what I was doing with grocery shopping or what we were doing eating out to eat or what we were doing picking up takeout. I was just focused on my work lunches. And once that got into place and became a normal habit, then I was able to transfer over and look at other things.
You've also done like no spends, like no spend challenges. I think that you just posted something that you're at 2 years of a particular no spend challenge. You want to talk about a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So March 1st marked 2 years of my clothing ban. So that means no buying clothes, shoes, jewelry, accessories, any of those things. That stemmed out of a fact of wanting to get to a more minimalist wardrobe. Eventually, I'd love to have a capsule wardrobe that you see online,
Hmm.
the pretty Pinterest, this is all the clothes I have. but
Right.
but I currently have a ton of clothing. And
Right.
so sustainably, in order to do that and have the least amount of impact as far as like waste and that sort of thing went, I felt like I needed to wear out the clothes I own first. And so I said to start out, I was going to go 1 year of this clothes buying ban. And to be honest, it was the first 3 to 6 months that were really the hardest. Once I'd gotten over that hump, it's been a lot easier. I've gotten a few gifts for Christmas and birthdays, like a pair of boots and a pair of running shoes, um, and some hand me downs from a few different people. But otherwise, I'm just learning to love and wear what I already own. 2 years kind of snuck up on me. I don't expect to make it to 3, but it's been a really good process, and it's been helpful to have an absolute ban. I walked into our Fred Meyer, which for those of you who aren't in the Northwest is like a grocery store / department store kind of place. And I walked in with my son, and there were all these clothes, like $10 for a new shirt or whatever. And, it's been 2 years and it was still tempting.
Right.
So, but saying, you know what, I haven't broken my ban, I was able to just walk on by and ignore it. And can I even remember what those things look like? Absolutely not. At some point, I will be buying clothes, but I want to have some strict guidelines in place before I do that and really think about it on the sustainability end, as well as, obviously you save money when you don't buy new clothes.
Are you doing that for your son as well? And is your husband, is he doing anything similar?
Not exactly. My husband really only buys new clothes when they have holes in them anyway, so it's not really a big issue for him. And then with my son, I haven't done an exact ban. The last piece of clothing I bought him was in January. I bought him a new pair of overalls. But other than that, most of his clothing is hand-me-downs, or occasionally I'll go to Goodwill and get some new clothes from the thrift store. But right now we've got plenty of hand-me-downs for the next couple sizes up. So he's pretty good. And I think that's probably the route I'm going to go at the point I do break my ban. I'm totally stoked to find a $3 pair of tennis shoes for him. But for whatever reason, I've had a block about buying shoes from thrift stores in the past. And it's like, well, if they're fine for my kid, they should probably be fine for me too.
Isn't that funny how we have those just little hangups that if you just really like break it down, it's like, what are you doing?
A unintended side effect to this, I've never been somebody who's worn a ton of makeup, but I would wear it for special occasions or if I just had a reason to dress up or whatever. But with not buying any new clothes or shoes or accessories and whatnot, I found myself not buying any makeup and not wearing it. I don't really know exactly why the connection has been so strong, but I realized I haven't worn makeup probably since the clothing ban started or soon after. For some reason in my brain, new clothes and new makeup are connected, and finding, loving what I already own and just wearing, the same cycle of clothes and kind of ignoring that part has me ignoring the makeup as well.
That's interesting. I've
Then,
been
yeah.
progressively not wearing makeup as well. Yeah, every once in a while I'll put, like, we went out with friends last night to celebrate their anniversary, and I think I put on lip stain and maybe some mascara, but that's it. And I don't really miss it. It's interesting that the less that you wear it, you just don't seem to. I don't
Yeah.
even want to take the time to do it sometimes.
Exactly. I think there's nothing wrong with wearing makeup if it's something that brings you joy and you really enjoy doing. I've never been a huge makeup person, and I think I really only did it because it's, normal. and what you do rather than something that actually brought me joy or made me feel all that different. Other than when you wear it every day, you feel weird not wearing it. But if you don't wear it all the time, then, your face is what your face is.
I want to give a shout out just really quick to Lauren and Ron in my local meetup group, our financial independence group. This weekend we had a meetup and it was really awesome because we had a presentation and they did a presentation on sustainability, which I thought was so cool and so interesting. And some of the things that they talked about mirror a lot of what you're talking about too. But one of the things that they're going to be putting on is they're going to be doing for our local group is a workshop on composting, which, I've mulled over a little bit, but I'm like, oh gosh, like how would that work? And, would even all of my kids and my husband, would they participate? And then I noticed that you had an article today from a guest post of someone who does curbside composting. How is that? Would you like to explain kind of how that is different from regular composting? And
yeah, so that's actually what I do as well. I've had a number of people ask me about to talk about composting or what I do because I do have such an extensive garden and write about that sometimes, but I cheat. I use our waste bin that goes out to the street, just like your garbage and recycling, and our yard waste accepts compost also. So all I do is we have these biodegradable bag liners in a small compost bin on our kitchen counter, and we take it out daily to our yard waste bin out in the carport, and we don't think about it anymore. It's really easy and really simple. I've considered doing my own composting, but it's one of those things where I've such a good industrial option that it really hasn't been something I've made the time for. Lori, who wrote the guest post today, had a situation where they didn't have curbside pickup for their compost, and so they had to do it in their backyard. And she was actually able to go through and get compost pickup started for her neighborhood, which I thought was totally fabulous. And if we ever move to somewhere where we don't have curbside pickup, that's something I would do. I didn't even consider the fact that you could pitch your local area to get them to get that started. So it's a really great deal if you don't garden. Even if you have the space, if you don't do a lot of gardening, you don't really have a use for the compost. If you live in an apartment or a condo and don't have an outside space, it's a great deal for that. Really, unless you want to be actively in the compost bit,
right.
Just having a place to throw your food waste is a really big deal. And upside, when you do compost, your garbage doesn't smell anymore.
Right. Right. Because you're not putting all the food waste in it. So do you have a special like composting bucket on your counter or do you just use a regular bucket?
So we started with just a regular bucket, but then we, went fancy and got a stainless steel compost bin that, is just a couple gallons that sits on our kitchen counter. So it looks a little bit nicer than the plastic tub that we had previously. But really just a small space to toss your scraps and then you take it out. Usually once a day or every other day before it starts smelling.
Right. How much does something like that cost? Do you know?
Like the compost bin that I have. I think it's like $20 or something.
Okay.
It's just a little metal bin that, or you can get like pretty ceramic ones or whatnot. It's really just a covered container that sits in your kitchen for your food scraps.
Nice. And so what I loved about her article or her post was that, how she went through the process of, initially she was in this community, it was something that she wanted to try out. And it really didn't take a whole lot of effort. She contacted the company, the waste company, and they said, well, get 4 other people. If we have 5 families, we'll come to your neighborhood. And it was really as simple as that. And then she, talked to her neighbors, talked to people on next door, and she got 4 people to agree to do it. And there you go. It was something that was then offered in our neighborhood. And she's working on it in our new neighborhood. And it's kind of a similar process. So I thought that was really cool. So it's just, thinking outside the box. And if you're interested in doing something, make a couple phone calls and see what you can do.
Well, and at least for us, we get charged per size of our garbage bin. So we have the smallest one that our company offers. But if you are composting all your food scraps, you might be able to shrink the size of the bin that you have for your trash pickup. So it can actually be a money saver as well. At least for us, we don't pay for compost yard waste. We only pay for the trash.
Oh,
So
nice.
if you can separate your recycling and your compost out and shrink the size of your garbage, then you're actually saving money as well.
So one of the bigger challenges for me, for our family, is that with 8 people, it's convenience is like one of my pressure points is doing the things that are convenient for me. And so one of the things that I've been feeling guilt things about is that we do use a lot of like snacks, convenient snacks and stuff for the kids for their lunches. But along with that is there's so much recycling and so much like plastic and that sort of thing with it. Are there any tips that you have that maybe in your house with a little one and like how you overcome those sorts of challenges?
Yeah, that's a constant one. Right now, he's really into these like individual like nutrition shake things, and there are a lot of waste. And it's something that I've debated trying to figure out. But right now, the trash with the kid is definitely higher than the trash for me. But certain things are like buying the big container of the goldfish and then putting them into separate containers, not Ziploc bags, but like in individual Tupperwares or like a reusable Ziploc, and then just portioning it out. Same with things like raisins. And, we don't buy the little packs of baby carrots, we buy the big Costco bag. So just trying to scale up the size of whatever container you're using and then parsing it out yourself. Obviously, that's a little bit extra work, but if you have enough of the little containers, you can kind of do it in one go and it's not a huge extra burden. But again, a lot of times those sort of things, they do have a little bit extra work than your disposable single-use option.
Now that they're getting a little bit older, I'm starting just to rethink like, they're getting older, they're a little bit more responsible and, not losing everything that goes to school with them. so, so you're thinking about, okay, well, maybe I can, start instead of using the Ziplocs or,
Right.
single
And
use.
that's the thing about like, yeah, it saves money to get the big thing of goldfish and then putting it in individual Ziploc snack bags. But then the amount of Ziploc bags you're going through, you're saving money, but you're definitely not saving waste.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But they do have these like nice cloth Ziploc bags that you can use instead. They're like food saver bags.
I've seen those and I forget what they're called, but they're made out of, there's some plant-based material where they're like a Ziploc, but they're not plastic.
Yeah. So there are definitely alternatives. They do cost a little bit upfront, but then once you have them, then you keep having them. And then you can really cut down on Ziploc waste and cost over the long term.
Lots of great ideas. One of my favorite things that you wrote about, and it was early on, was your truck tent. What do you call it?
Truck camping. Yeah.
Yes, your truck camping. So tell us about that. Like, how did you guys think to do that? And kind of what was because there was some experimentation with like
Yes.
putting the bed in the back of the truck, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we've done a lot of camping and hiking and whatnot, our whole relationship, and that didn't change when we had our son. But we'd generally been camping in tents, which is fine and great. But when you go in the winter and it's rainy and wet and cold, it's a little bit more unpleasant. And so we're tempted to, rent an Airbnb instead. So my husband put a canopy on his truck. And to start with, we, before he got the canopy, we actually jerry-rigged a like 2x4 and plastic tarp over the back of the tent and just used our camping pads in the back to see if it was something that really, is this even better than a tent? And that first time, it was definitely not quite as good as a canopy, but definitely saw the upsides over a tent, just, the speed of setup and ability to be off the ground and in the winter, a little bit warmer and drier. And then they actually make air mattresses that are meant for truck beds. So instead of like your normal square air mattress. They've got like little flaps that go over the wheel wells.
Mhm.
So you get the whole truck bed and not just what's in between the wheel wells, which gets pretty squeezy with three of us. But when you when you get that extra space, it really, really helps. And then with that and the canopy, and now we've got LED lights in there. And when we're at a campsite with power, we have an electric blanket as well. So we can go camping in 30 degrees and be toasty warm. And having that option over a tent makes it a lot more likely that we're going to go camping in the off season.
That's nice. Do you guys have a pet?
We have four now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so we have two dogs, a cat, and a corn snake right now.
Do you take your dogs with you when you go camping?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Our dogs don't travel very well. We take them occasionally, but generally, if we're doing some dispersed camping or somewhere off grid, that's also not too far because one of our dogs gets car sick. But we do, yeah. And she has heart problems and is on medication. So if it's too hot, she can't go. And so there's definitely some barriers to bringing them with us all the time. So we do maybe 1 in 4 times when we go camping, we'll bring them with us. Otherwise, we do have a roommate. And so we can kind of go on a whim and there's still somebody at home to take care of the animals. So it's a big bonus.
Let's talk about that because you mentioned your roommate, and I know that that's kind of part of the reducing expenses portion. So how did you guys always have a roommate, or was that development?
Pretty much our entire marriage and relationship that we've lived together. My husband and I have had a roommate probably all but 6 months of more than a decade now. Initially, it was definitely a cost saver. When we were in South Carolina, it was, I think, $50 a month more to get a 2-bedroom than a 1-bedroom. So we got a 2-bedroom and got a roommate. And then when we moved back to Washington and then bought our home, we were 23. So pretty much everybody had roommates at that point. And so we were able to easily find people to come live with us. And then the plan was always, at the point I got pregnant, that we would kick out whoever was living with us so that we would just have our family home. That was at least the deal. And then when I did get pregnant, our current roommate was living with us and had been for a couple of years at that point. And we're like, he's actually a pretty easy guy to live with. We've got a pretty good household going on here. Do you want to stay even when you're going to be living with a newborn and then a young kid? And he's like, yeah, no, I'll be fine. I'll wear plugs if I have to. And so actually, he works night shift now, so we don't really see him during the week. But at the point my son was born, he was working day shift, and he actually made dinners for us like 3 or 4 times a week when we had a newborn. So it was really awesome. And then, when we travel, especially, out of state, we have him to take care of the animals. So we don't charge him very much rent. He's paying probably half or less of what somebody would rent a room for in our area at this point. But when you consider the number of nights he takes care of the animals, or occasionally makes dinner. He made dinner for us again last night. Or, if he's at the grocery store, he'll ask us if there's something we need. There is a lot more value to it than just the rent check that comes in every month.
Right. And it sounds like just a really good, mutually beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. When he was cooking last night, our son wanted to help. So I've got a picture of him hanging on to our 4-year-old and, going slow and letting him help cook with him. So it's been a really good experience for all of us.
I love it. That's so cool. And I love that, like, you were open to considering something maybe just a little bit outside the box, even after your son was born. Because I think that's kind of that is a concern for some people. It's like, oh, well, I have children, and I don't think I could do that and have someone in our house if we have children. And it's like, maybe think outside the box, and maybe you find the perfect roommate or not, but you can consider it.
Yeah, no, there have definitely been more upsides to downsides with having him with us.
So Angela, one of the other things that has been really great about your blog is that you have, in one of probably the most popular posts that you have, is that you spotlighted the women in the financial independence community. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that and kind of what was the catalyst for that and kind of what it's grown into?
Okay, so this was actually pretty early into my blogging journey. I think I'd only been blogging for 6 months at the time. So I was definitely a very newbie blogger at the time. But I had been reading one of the larger bloggers' blog roll of, his favorite bloggers at one point, and he had this big long list. And there was literally one woman on the list. And I was reading through the comments, and one of them asked, "Hey, like, I would really love to read some more stories of women. Do you have any other suggestions for me?" And he was able to think of one other woman. And I've been a blog reader for like 8 or 9 years now. So I was like, I can think up a lot more than two women that are writing about money.
Right.
And so I'd been thinking about it for a while. And then just one day I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put this down because obviously this needs to be out there. So I wrote down my list of women personal finance, financial independence bloggers, and it was like 30 some at that point. And I published it, and the response was way more than I could have ever expected. It was kind of amazing. And all these other suggestions poured in of other women that were writing, some of whom I'd known and I just hadn't thought about when I was putting together the list, and then others that I had never heard of. And that list has since grown. It needed to be cut out into sections and categories because there were just so many women. And now it has podcasters and authors on there as well. But it's clear that as much as we've talked about it in the year and change since it's been published, this is still something that is not heard by a lot of people.
Well, and I just think that that's so baffling. It's just baffling to me. And I guess maybe just because it's something that is on my radar and it's on your radar too. It's like, well, it wasn't really that hard for you to find all these women. They're there. If you're looking for them, they're there.
Yeah.
And so,
well, and there was this, I think you probably read it in the past week, more mainstream article that wrote about all her problems with the FIRE movement. And she talked about all the men and all of their really like frugal till you die kind of stuff. And but the interesting thing is she talked about how many women aren't in this movement and how it's really just like a guys club basically. But all it would have taken would have been for her to Google like women financial independence, and a whole bunch of stuff would pop up. So I think a lot of that has to do with just the bias that women, talk about couponing if they're going to talk about money. And not that there is a whole host of us that are talking about stuff beyond that. It's there, but the default is still the guy that's writing about money and writing about financial independence and early retirement and financial freedom. But
the authority on it.
Yeah, and that are the authority. So I think it's changing, but slowly. And then, those big articles come out, and it's frustrating that as much as we're seeing change maybe in our smaller circle, it's not quite expanded from there. But I do run a women's personal finance Facebook page, and that's closing in on 5,000 members already. And it's really active and it's really wonderful. And there's a lot less drama than the co-ed groups. And it's just been a wonderful group to be a part of. It's really exciting. Yeah.
I'm part of it too. And I'll have to say that like 5,000 today, when like a month ago, it was at 3,000. Like it's just, and so what that speaks to me is that there's just, not just that there's a need for it, but that it really just is a welcoming place, and it's a place where women want to be. And I will say that it is the most supportive community. There's no, minimizing of someone's thoughts or someone's question or someone's concern. And there's just been an outpouring of support whenever there is any kind of like, this is my situation. What should I do? So I love it. I love to see women supporting women. And I will say of your article with your list of the women in finance, that it's it's all women on the spectrum. You've got them in categories for married, not married, singles without kids, singles with kids. So there really is this, it, it's a list for everyone, which I love that. And I'm so grateful that you took the initiative to do that.
Yeah. And it's very interesting, especially like with the Facebook page, that with the size that it is now, I'm kind of surprised that as an admin, there's less for me to do than I think I would have expected for a group of its size and its activity level. Um, there is a little bit of policing that we have to do, but very little for its size, I think.
And the policing that happens is more to do with more like self-promotion type stuff, I would think, as opposed, at least from what I've seen, as opposed to, someone just being a jerk.
Oh, that's very true. It's 99.9% is self-promotion or, click this link to my multi-level marketing scheme. But even that doesn't happen too often.
Right.
But it's been really great. And then I also started my Women's Personal Finance Wednesdays roundup, where I share 3 of my favorite posts by women in the last week. And that's been really fun to do. I wasn't certain if I wanted to start writing a 3rd post a week, but just the traffic that goes out to other women bloggers is totally awesome. And it makes it totally worth it for me to do. I realize I'm still, a small fry in this, but I'm doing what I can to start changing perspectives about who cares about money and who's talking about it.
Well, I think you are, and I think you're making a big impact, and I think that you're giving a lot of women who might not otherwise have their voices heard, be heard, because I do think that you are being recognized, and that just helps to spotlight on other women as well. But I don't know how you have the time to do 3 articles a week.
Well, to be fair, the Wednesdays, it's really just sharing other people's articles. So it's not quite a full post, but like I said at the beginning, it's easier for me to blog than it is for me to podcast because I can do it in small chunks.
Right. Well, I thank you again so much for coming on. I'm so glad that we were able to do this. And so if you are ready, I have some final questions for you.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So what was one lesson you learned about money or finances, good or bad, growing up that you have carried over into your financial independence journey?
So when we were young, if there is something outside of the ordinary that we wanted to buy, even as young kids, my parents would never buy it for us outright. But one example I'm thinking about is when I was probably 8 or 9, I wanted a bunk bed in my room so that I could have friends come and stay for sleepovers. And they said, sure, you can get a bunk bed, but you have to earn half the money. Which, a bunk bed is not terribly cheap,
No.
but they were willing to support me if I really wanted it that badly. But I had to pony up and forego other things if it was something that was worth it to me. So my parents growing up definitely made sure that we had some sense of the value of the dollar and that sometimes you had to wait and save up for something rather than just get it right off the bat.
And you got the bunk bed, right?
I did.
I bet that was fun though, having, your friends over and stuff. I always wanted a bunk bed growing up and I never got one. My kids have bunk beds though. We've got 2 bunk beds crammed into one room. We put all 4 boys into one room and they have a lot of fun. We sit in there at night and we listen to them just chatter until they fall asleep.
Yeah. So now we're working with our son who's 4, who really wants a fish tank now. So trying to figure out exactly how much is fair for him to earn. But right now he is feeding the dogs and letting them out in the morning like he does. And he gets a few coins for that every day. And so I just need to figure out exactly how much is fair for a 4-year-old to have to save up. It's amazing that even at his age, if you start telling him that he has to use his money for something, it completely changes the conversation.
Right. The desire for it.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't really want that. And what is one favorite life hack that you have that is either made your life easier or that brings you joy?
I'd have to say working 80% time at my job because I have an extra couple of hours every day over the typical 9 to 5 job. And so that's like, having getting to have this conversation with you right now would be a normal work time hour if I were full time. So having time for things other than work and other than parenting and just working a little bit less every day makes space for other things in my life.
Was that something that you had to pitch to your employer, or was that something that they offered?
Yeah, it was a conversation. So I ramped up maternity leave to the point where I was working full time when my son was 5 months old, and I was doing part of that from home, and then part of that family would be watching him. And I just found I was working during nap time and after bedtime every day, and pretty much Monday through Friday, I was just kind of running like a crazy person, trying to get everything done, and it just wasn't fun and wasn't enjoyable. And when he was about a year old, we put him into childcare 2 days a week. And then we had the conversation about me cutting back at work. So 80% time means 80% of my salary. And I had to give up some of my job duties, but it also meant that I just needed to be more focused when I was at work. And it's been 3 years now, and it's been a really, really good experience. And because I didn't cut back further, I was still able to keep the core of the important stuff with my job. I think if I was less time than that, I would have had to see a really big change. But because I was still, I'm still in the office 5 days a week, I'm still in the office 6 to 7 hours a day. It's enough to get a lot done when I stay focused and bust it out. So it's been a really good thing on both sides, I think.
I just listened to on the Choose Five podcast. Brad and Jonathan just had last week someone who basically
went part-time,
it went
right?
part-time, and it was just very eye-opening, and how he rationalized it, or pitched it to these employers is that, look, I'm going to be more productive in the 5 or the 6 hours that I'm going to work, as opposed to, okay, yeah, someone is maybe on the clock for 8 hours, but you think, an hour of that is, a break. And then how much more time are they wasting, chatting around the water cooler or whatever. So in reality, this is the time that you're getting from them, and you're paying them a full salary. Whereas I'm willing to work for half that for 4 hours, and I'll still do the same amount of work, which I thought was brilliant. And there's no real risk in asking. So I think that's really cool that you were able to, both serve your employer, but also, meet the needs of your family, which is great.
Yeah, I listened to that episode too, and I definitely agree with a lot of what he was saying. And as I've gone to less than full-time hours and I've started to pay attention, there are more people doing this sort of thing than you realize. I think it just takes the initiative to say, hey, this is what I want. But there's a lot more flexibility than I think a lot of people realize. But also having the space between your income and your expenses gives you the opportunity to even consider it.
Angela, is there a book that you're reading right now, or what is your favorite book?
So I actually just finished Nomadland, and it's a really interesting one. It's about mostly the baby boomers that have either been pushed out of their jobs due to age, or lost their homes or their retirement savings in the Great Recession. And basically, they're living in vans and buses and RVs and travel trailers, and going around the country and then working part-time low-wage jobs in order to make ends meet. And I thought it was a really interesting read, because a lot of what they're doing and the essence of the community feels very similar to the financial independence community, especially those who have gone with the more nomadic lifestyle, at least part-time, except for the big part where in this community of ours, you're not worrying about where your next paycheck is in order to buy groceries. So it's a cautionary tale of making sure that you set yourself up for the point where you no longer can work. Not everyone chooses their retirement date. And then also it was just really fascinating and somewhat uplifting in parts about, the freedom that comes from fewer expenses and fewer material goods.
Right. So their situation is more of a need-based situation versus maybe people in the fire community. It's a choice.
Yeah. But I think any of us who are reading about this fire stuff would also really enjoy that book.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll link to both. I'll link to the book and also make sure that I link to the articles and the Facebook group in the show notes so that people can check those out if they're interested. And what is the best way for people to find you, Angela?
So I blog over at Tread Lightly, Retire Early. And then I'm also on Twitter at treadlightly_RE. And those are the two best places to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Angela. This has been fun and I learned a lot and definitely a lot of takeaways in this episode. So thank you so much.
Thanks. It was great to chat.
Well, House of Five family, that brings this episode to a close. If you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe in iTunes, as well as any of the other platforms you've found us on. We're on just about all of them. Also, please leave us a written review. They help us to know what you're liking about the show, what we can do better. And for every 5 reviews we receive, that's written reviews, we will give away one of our favorite reads, and that is currently Kids' Money Habits by Amy Coit. It's a great book full of great information, both for parents and kids. Don't forget to check out our show notes on the webpage. There is always bonus information there that didn't make it to the show, and we strive to create good content on there. So please head on over to the website and check that out. Finally, you can find us on Facebook. You can either like our page or you can become part of our Facebook group. It's a private group, and in there we have ongoing discussions about each episode as well as other topics within the FI community or questions that you have that we can address with upcoming guests. Again, thank you for listening. Come back next week. We're glad you're here.